Welcome to The Writer Reads, Mack and Me, an Odyssey. Book 2, Mack and Me, Blaedergil's Host. Chapter 32, Home Again, Home Again. I was still kneeling when the door opened. I lifted my head but didn't move, and the arach who'd brought my food didn't come in. The clan leader says you are to eat. He set a flask beside the tray, and drink. Thank you, I said, and wished I still had some of my scan equipment so I could check for poison. For a long moment I did not move, trying to work out what I was going to do. In the end, I left the food and put myself through a rigorous series of stretches and relaxation routines. By the end of them, I was shaking with fatigue and tired enough to sleep. It was hard to stretch out on the floor of the cell and close my eyes, but I had to believe that the arach had a strong clan-based warrior culture and would keep their word. I knew I'd impressed them. Firstly, because I was still alive, and secondly, because I'd been offered food, a courtesy, even if it was only to ensure I had sufficient blood for them to share. Pushing that thought out of my mind, I wondered how Mack and the others were going. I figured that at the end of this, Mack was going to have more than a little to say. I listened to the silent dark of the cell and my mind, hoping Mack would do his usual trick of being around to answer me when I needed him to. But he didn't, and I eventually drifted off to sleep. The arach came at the 24th hour. By that stage, I'd been awake long enough to work the stiffness out of my joints and muscles and put myself through a set of warm-ups in kata that would see me as ready for battle as I could be. The food from the evening before still sat beside the door, untouched, and the arach who collected it looked askance. It was a gift of hospitality from the leader of my clan, he said, and I looked at him. Would you have eaten or drunk? From the look on his face he might have, but then he thought about it, and some of the confusion ebbed out of his expression. I meant your clan no insult, I added, but he did not acknowledge my words, and I didn't know what that meant. With any luck, I wasn't going to be around long enough to find out. My stomach clenched, and I pushed down a sense of nausea. There was nothing left in my gut as far as I could tell, but I still couldn't afford to look weak. I stood and waited for the arach to come and fetch me. It seemed like forever before their leader of the day previous stepped into the room. Come, he said. Your weapons are waiting. That caused a flurry of concern at the other end of my implant. What did he mean by that? Stand by for assassination. Not helpful, guys, I transmitted back, and I hoped they were wrong, because it had seemed like an odd turn of phrase. I hesitated. My weapons await, I said, but does the arena? Everything stands in readiness. And now I was really on edge. Somehow I thought this had a lot to do with the meal I had not eaten, but I couldn't be sure. I wasn't exactly up on arach cultural mores. You're going to have to be fast, Tens. Something's up. Gotcha. Come, little human. There is no avoiding fate. And the arach leader came and stood just inside the door. It took an effort to take that first step toward him, and more to take a second. There was something in the way he was standing that made me think of a giant spider, just waiting to pounce. It was an image he lived up to when I came to a halt before him. He laid a hand on my shoulder and reached down to take my wrist. I had an idea just how much trouble I was in before he peeled back the cuff on the armor and slid his finger beneath the wristband. I am sorry, he said, but we do not allow jewelry in the arena. I had nothing to say to that, but stared at him wide-eyed as he lifted the locator off my wrist and then snapped the band in two. He smiled as he broke it into another two pieces and dropped them to the deck, where he crushed them under the heel of his boot. His hand tightened on my shoulder. You have been sentenced, he said, and there is no escape. Fear felt like a solid lump in my throat, but I forced myself to nod and swallowed hard against the scream that wanted to escape. I found it hard to find my voice, harder still to keep it steady. The arena? I asked, forcing myself to keep my eyes on his face. Awaits, he said, and let go of my shoulder, gesturing for me to precede him out of the cell. I sure as shit hoped Tens had another plan for locating me on the teleport system, or I was well and truly fucked. I reached the door and got 3 steps into the cargo bay before the light hit. There was just enough time for me to regret not having my weapons, but not enough time to wonder how much in penalties I was going to be fined for losing the helmet to the suit before the arach and their ship faded from sight. I don't think I'd ever been so happy to find myself aboard Mack's ship in what seemed like a lifetime of running away from it. The light faded, and I reached for my weapons, backing up from the human shapes I saw in front of me, even as I pivoted to check out what was behind me. I knew this room. I knew the room, and I recognized the people in it, but I'd been about to face down up to a dozen human-looking aliens who were going to beat me to a pulp and then kill me, and my brain didn't quite get that it was safe. Cutter! Mac's voice made me jump, and I half turned, my eyes seeking an exit. He came out from behind the console he'd been standing behind. Cutter! It's all right. Stand down. Stand down. I knew those words. The trouble was, I was almost always being told to stand down, especially when I wanted to shoot some arsehole who thoroughly deserved it. Stand down, Cutter. We've got you. We've got you. Ten said that. Part of me recognized the phrase and started to relax. Ten's only said that when he'd hauled me out of the shit. We've got you, Ten said, moving toward me. I backed up a step, and he stopped at the edge of the platform, stretching out a hand to stop Mack moving forward. You're safe. Safe. I stood still, finally registering the very concerned looks on the very concerned faces of the people standing at the edge of the dais. Oh, safe. I stared at them a moment longer and realized I didn't want to run from them. Not right now, and maybe not for a long time. Right now, I needed to stop running, if only for a little bit. Mack, I said, and Ten snorted, but he kept his hand on Mack's chest. Even though they hadn't said a word, I couldn't bring myself to move toward them. Instead, I just let my knees buckle and lowered myself to the top of the platform with my hands resting on my thighs. Okay, Ten said, and I looked up in time to see him drop his hand away from Mack's chest and turn back to the console. Case, get us out of here. The ship shuddered beneath us, and I wondered where we were going, but it didn't seem important as Mack slid to his knees beside me and pulled me into his arms and then into his lap. This time I let him, taking comfort from the warmth of his chest and the strength of his arms, as he pulled me tight against himself, neither of us speaking a word. I should wring your bloody neck, he murmured, his lips brushing the top of my head. It made me laugh. You'll need to join the queue. I pissed off a lot of people today. Yeah, but I was one of the first. This was true. And you left me behind, I told him, on an arach ship. I should punch you for that. I felt him rear back a little and knew he was looking down at me, could picture the surprise on his face. After going through all that, you want to go 3 rounds? He asked. No, I said, and felt him sigh in relief and bend back around me. I took a deep breath and then several more, as though sniffing the air, and then I sniffed at my shirt. No, I repeated. What I really want is some serious sand time and some fresh clothes. Honestly, how do you stand being this close to me? I stink. I heard him sniff, and then he eased me out of his lap and set me down on the floor. You're right, you do stink. And he stood up and made a show of brushing himself off. And now I stink. That is the last time I give you a hug when you need it. Next time I'm going to make you get changed first. Well, There was only one answer to that. I stood up and took a step toward him, making him take a wary step back. Normally, this is where I would have slugged him as hard as I could. But today I just couldn't. I really did want some alone time in the sand. I curled my lip and moved toward the door, threading my way between the control consoles for the teleportation unit and studiously not looking at either Delight or Tens. Doc intercepted me on the other side. I need I need some sand time and some food, I snapped, and he took a step back. Unless there's something serious you need to check me for. He took another step back, raising both hands as though surrendering. Fine, but you come and see me once you've eaten. I reached the door and stopped. Fine, Doc. After I've eaten. I turned to go, but Mack's voice stopped me. Cutter! This time I turned and glared at him. We're debriefing over supper. I flicked a hand at him and pivoted back to the door. What the hell ever, I said, trying for irritating as I stepped out into the corridor beyond. This time, no one called me back, and I made it to my cabin and into the privacy of the sand unit before the aftershock hit. And it hit like a ton. I curled up in a ball under the water, and I cried. I refused to think about what Bio were going to say regarding the use of resources. I just bawled, using the sound of the shower to hide the sound and the water itself to wash away my tears. And when I was done with that, I stood up and scrubbed myself close to raw, washing away the scent and feel of spider from my skin, and making sure not the slightest piece of blood or brain or whatever else remained on me. Yesterday hadn't been the first day I'd killed, but it had been the first time it had been quite so many and quite so up close and personal.